At a quarterly review meeting, my daughter-in-law, Serafina, publicly fired me from the company I helped build. After 37 years, she called me outdated. I just smiled, hiding a secret plan. When she finds out what I really built, her world will crumble. Like, share, and tell me where you're listening from. You won't believe what happens next. The fluorescent lights of the conference room hummed, casting a sterile glow on the faces around the polished mahogany table. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Serafina, her daughter-in-law, stood at the head of the table, her crisp suit jacket perfectly tailored, her voice cool and detached. "Eleanor," Serafina began, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the other executives. "We've concluded our quarterly review. As of this morning, your services are no longer required. We don't want outdated people in this company anymore." The words hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow, yet she felt no outward tremor. 65 years old, and after 37 years of dedicating her life to this company, from a humble secretary to its vice president, she was being publicly dismissed by the woman who married her son. The quarterly review, the sudden urgency, the extra scrutiny. It all clicked into place. It wasn't a review at all. It was a calculated setup. A stage for her humiliation. A profound shock settled deep within her, a cold realization of betrayal. Her son, Nathaniel, was not here. He was away on a business trip, blissfully unaware, or so she hoped. Eleanor observed Serafina's almost imperceptible lean forward, a silent expectation for tears, an angry outburst, anything to validate this cruel performance. But Eleanor gave her nothing. She simply straightened her posture, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "Well," she said, her voice steady, carrying just enough resonance to fill the sudden void in the room. "I suppose that's that." The composure was an act, a shield against the searing humiliation, but it was a convincing one. Serafina's perfect smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of annoyance perhaps, that her target remained unbowed. Then, a voice broke the tense silence. It was Daniel, from the design team. A young man Eleanor had mentored for years. His face was pale, but his eyes held a defiant spark. "Eleanor," he began, his voice surprisingly strong. "This isn't right. You built this place. Every brick, every innovative idea, every client relationship. You were instrumental." His words hung in the air, a testament to the loyalty Serafina had clearly underestimated. Eleanor turned to Daniel, her smile warming slightly, genuinely touched by his courage. "Thank you, Daniel," she said softly, her gaze briefly meeting his before sweeping back to Serafina. In that fleeting moment, she caught it, a subtle flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even a nascent fear, in Serafina's usually impenetrable eyes. It was a crack in the facade, a hint that perhaps not everyone was as easily swayed as Serafina believed. As Eleanor rose, gathering the few personal items on the table, a pen, a small notepad, she felt the weight of her entire career pressing down on her. The walk from the conference room to her office felt like traversing decades, 37 years, from answering phones and typing letters, to negotiating multi-million-dollar deals and guiding the company through market crashes. She had poured her youth, her intellect, her very soul into these walls. She had watched it grow from a small startup into a formidable force in the industry, nurturing it as if it were her own child. It wasn't just a job, it was her legacy, a testament to her tenacity and vision. Reaching her office, the place that had been her sanctuary, her battlefield, her second home, Eleanor moved with a quiet efficiency. She pulled a medium-sized cardboard box from the supply closet. One by one, she placed cherished items inside. The worn, leather-bound journal where she jotted down ideas. A small clay pot her son, Nathaniel, had made for her in elementary school, and his graduation photo. His bright, hopeful smile, a stark contrast to her current situation. Each item was a memory, a piece of the life she had intricately woven into the fabric of this company. It felt like she was packing away fragments of herself. A gentle knock interrupted her melancholy task. It was Sophie, one of the younger accountants, her eyes wide with a mixture of sympathy and indignation. "Eleanor," Sophie whispered, stepping cautiously into the office. "This is wrong. Everyone knows how much you've done for this company. It's an absolute disgrace." Eleanor offered Sophie a gentle, reassuring smile. "Thank you, Sophie," she said, her voice calm despite the storm brewing within her. She paused, then added, "But sometimes change is necessary, isn't it?" Even as the words left her lips, she knew she didn't believe them. This wasn't necessary change. It was a ruthless power play, a generational purge, but she wouldn't let Sophie, or anyone else, see her pain. The office, once a vibrant hub of activity, was quickly stripped bare. The empty shelves, the stark desk, the blank walls, it mirrored the hollow feeling in her chest. She thought of Serafina, so polished, so ambitious, so utterly devoid of sentiment. Serafina represented a new breed, one that saw people as cogs to be replaced, not foundations to be cherished. With her cardboard box clutched to her chest, Eleanor walked through the main office one last time. The usually bustling space was subdued, almost reverent. Heads turned, eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of sadness, respect, and quiet solidarity. Some offered small, sympathetic nods. Others simply lowered their gazes, unable to meet her steady stare. It was a silent farewell, a collective acknowledgement of what was being lost. As she neared the elevator, Serafina emerged from her own office, her lips curved into a satisfied smirk. She leaned against the doorframe, her posture radiating victory. "I trust you have everything, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice laced with an almost gloating sweetness. Eleanor stopped directly in front of her daughter-in-law, meeting her gaze head-on. Her own expression remained serene, her eyes clear and unreadable. "I do," she replied calmly, her voice even. Then, a subtle shift occurred. Her gaze hardened imperceptibly, a chilling steel entering her tone. "Good luck, Serafina," she continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "You're going to need it." A flash of genuine panic, sharp and unmistakable, flickered in Serafina's eyes, quickly veiled, but not before Eleanor caught it. Without another word, Eleanor turned and stepped into the waiting elevator. The doors hissed shut, cutting off Serafina's stunned expression, the quiet office, and 37 years of her life. As the elevator began its descent, an unsettling sense of calm settled over Eleanor. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The driver's seat of her old sedan offered little comfort, yet Eleanor found herself lingering there, the heavy cardboard box beside her. The shock of her dismissal was still a raw wound, but a deeper, more insidious pain began to surface. The pain of a betrayal that had been years in the making. She closed her eyes, and the sterile conference room faded, replaced by the warm, inviting glow of her living room 3 years earlier. It was an evening that, in hindsight, marked the beginning of everything. 3 years ago, on a crisp autumn evening, her phone had rung, Nathaniel's voice bubbling with an infectious excitement she hadn't heard in years. "Mom, you won't believe it," he had practically shouted, the joy radiating through the phone line. "I've met someone special. Really. Truly special. I want you to meet her. Can you make your famous pot roast this Sunday, please? For me?" Eleanor's heart had swelled with a mixture of delight and trepidation. Nathaniel, her only son, had always been a little reserved in matters of the heart since his last serious relationship ended abruptly years ago. To hear him so enthused, so eager, filled her with a profound happiness. She had spent the entire weekend in a whirlwind of preparation. Her modest, but meticulously kept home, was polished to a shine. She'd chosen her best tablecloth, polished the silverware, and bought fresh flowers, and, of course, she had lovingly prepared her pot roast, simmering it to perfection. The aroma filling the house with a comforting warmth. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a significant milestone, an introduction to a potential future daughter, and Eleanor wanted to make the best possible impression. Sunday arrived, and with it, Nathaniel and his new girlfriend, Serafina Thorne. Eleanor remembered the exact moment they walked through her front door. Serafina was breathtakingly beautiful, a vision of polished elegance. Her dark hair was styled in sleek waves, her eyes a striking shade of green, and her smile, though warm, seemed perfectly calibrated, almost rehearsed. She wore a tailored cream dress that spoke of quiet luxury, and her poise was impeccable. Nathaniel, usually so self-contained, was utterly captivated, his gaze rarely leaving her. He looked at her with an adoration that both thrilled and subtly unnerved Eleanor. Serafina extended a hand towards Eleanor, her grip firm and confident. "It's such a pleasure to finally meet you, Eleanor. Nathaniel has told me so much about you." Her voice was smooth, melodic, perfectly modulated. Her smile was like something straight off a magazine cover. Flawless, radiant. Yet, as Eleanor returned the handshake, a shiver, cold and subtle, traced its way down her spine. Beneath the veneer of perfection, in the depths of those striking green eyes, Eleanor sensed something else. Something calculating, a fleeting impression of a mind constantly assessing, evaluating, rather than genuinely connecting. Eleanor immediately chided herself. "Nonsense," she thought. "You're just being an overprotective mother." She forced a wider smile, pushing aside the unsettling intuition. "It's a pleasure to meet you too, dear. Welcome. Please. Call me Eleanor." She led them into the dining room, determined to be open-minded, to embrace Nathaniel's happiness. Throughout dinner, Serafina played the role of the perfect guest with effortless grace. She complimented Eleanor's cooking effusively, declaring the pot roast the best she'd ever tasted, making Eleanor's cheeks flush with a pride she tried to temper. She listened intently to Nathaniel's childhood stories, laughing in all the right places, asking intelligent questions that showed genuine interest. She spoke of her own career in marketing, with a quiet confidence that was admirable, yet never boastful. She was, on the surface, everything a mother could wish for her son. Nathaniel, watching Serafina, was clearly enchanted, his face alight with a joy that Eleanor hadn't seen in years. Later, as they cleared the table and began washing dishes, Serafina joined Eleanor in the kitchen, offering to help. "Your home is so cozy, Eleanor," she remarked, her gaze sweeping across the slightly worn but well-loved kitchen. The words were complimentary, but Eleanor caught a subtle, almost imperceptible hint of condescension in her tone, a slight downward tilt of her lips that spoke volumes. It was a faint whisper of an insult, disguised as a compliment. Eleanor glanced at Serafina, whose eyes were now lingering on the faded floral curtains and the antique, slightly chipped china cabinet. There it was again, that detached gaze, as if Serafina were not in a warm, lived-in home, but rather visiting a quaint museum, observing artifacts from a bygone era with polite, yet distant, curiosity. It solidified the earlier uneasy feeling. A sense that Serafina saw Eleanor's world not as a home, but as something to be categorized and mildly judged. The next day, still wrestling with her conflicting feelings, Eleanor called her sister, Brenda. "There's something off about her, Brenda," Eleanor confessed, her voice tight with unspoken concern. "She's beautiful, brilliant even. But there's a coldness underneath, a manufactured charm. I can't quite put my finger on it." Brenda, ever the pragmatist, immediately dismissed Eleanor's anxieties with a gentle laugh. "Oh, Eleanor, you're just being you. You've always been so overprotective of Nathaniel. Remember when he dated Jessica and you were convinced she was only after his college fund? Or that art student, Mark, you swore he was going to lead Nathaniel astray." Brenda's words, though teasing, hit home. Eleanor sighed, acknowledging the truth in her sister's observations. She was protective, but it stemmed from a deep, primal love. She had raised Nathaniel alone, pouring every ounce of her energy and devotion into him after his father's sudden death when Nathaniel was just 7. That early loss had forged an unbreakable bond between them, a fierce need to shield him from any potential pain or disappointment. It had also, perhaps, made her overly cautious, acutely attuned to any perceived threat to his happiness. Over the following months, as Nathaniel and Serafina's relationship blossomed, Eleanor watched, a quiet observer. She saw Serafina subtly, almost imperceptibly, begin to reshape Nathaniel's life. His wardrobe, once a collection of comfortable, practical clothes, slowly transformed into sharp suits and designer casual wear, all chosen with Serafina's impeccable taste. His apartment, once cluttered with books and old movie posters, became minimalist and sleek, filled with modern art and expensive, understated furniture. Even his hobbies seemed to shift, old interests fading to be replaced by evenings at upscale galleries and exclusive restaurants. Activities Serafina curated. Nathaniel, however, seemed blissfully happy, swept up in Serafina's sophisticated world. He often called Eleanor, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "Mom, you should see the new painting Serafina picked out for my living room," he'd gush. "She has such good taste. Everything she touches just becomes better. It's like having a whole new life." That phrase, "a whole new life," echoed in Eleanor's mind, a discordant note in the symphony of Nathaniel's happiness. It unnerved her deeply. It wasn't just a new life. It felt like Nathaniel was being subtly, meticulously, remade in Serafina's image, losing pieces of himself in the process. The metallic scent of her car's interior, mixed with the faint aroma of the cardboard box of her life, brought Eleanor back to the present. Yet, the phrase "a whole new life," spoken by Nathaniel, still echoed in her memory, haunting her. It wasn't just a new chapter, she realized with a growing dread. It implied that his previous life, the one she had so painstakingly built with him, the one that intimately included her, was somehow insufficient, perhaps even flawed. This realization was a bitter pill to swallow. Slowly, insidiously, Nathaniel began to drift away. Their cherished weekly lunches, a tradition spanning years, became increasingly rare. First, it was an important business dinner that ran late, then a spontaneous weekend getaway Serafina had planned, then a vague excuse about a demanding work schedule. Each missed lunch was a small, almost imperceptible tear in the fabric of their closeness, a tiny stone added to the wall growing between them. When they did manage to meet, Serafina was invariably present. Her presence wasn't overtly hostile, but it was a constant, subtle redirection. Conversations about Eleanor's day at the company, or old family anecdotes, would often be subtly shifted by Serafina. "Oh, Nathaniel, tell Eleanor about the new project you're spearheading," she'd interject, smoothly steering the focus to his professional accomplishments. Or, if Nathaniel shared a story from his childhood, Serafina would often correct a minor detail, or offer a slightly more polished version, as if refining his memories for better presentation. Eleanor also noticed Serafina's habit of saying, "Oh, Nathaniel, you're being modest." Whenever he spoke humbly about his achievements, it was always delivered with a fond, knowing smile. But the underlying message was clear. He was downplaying his success, perhaps for his mother's benefit, implying that Eleanor somehow needed to be shielded from the full scope of her son's brilliance. It was a subtle, yet effective, way of creating a wedge. 18 months after their first meeting, the wedding announcement arrived. It wasn't the large, joyous family affair Eleanor had always envisioned for her son. Instead, it was to be a small, exclusive ceremony in the elegant, sprawling vineyards of Napa Valley. Nathaniel had called, sounding a little defensive, assuring her, "Mom, it's nothing fancy, really. Just close friends and family." Eleanor knew better. She had seen the brochures, heard the whispers. Nothing fancy in Serafina's vocabulary meant understated luxury. Extravagant cost veiled in minimalist chic. The venue alone would be exorbitant. During the wedding preparations, Eleanor tried to offer her help, her experience. She suggested a local florist known for her stunning arrangements, or a small, charming bakery for the wedding cake. Each suggestion, however, was met with Serafina's polite, yet firm dismissal. "Eleanor, that's sweet," Serafina would say, her smile unwavering, "but we're going for a more sophisticated aesthetic. We've already secured a high-end designer. Thank you, though." It was always we, always sophisticated, always a gentle but absolute rejection of Eleanor's more traditional, heartfelt contributions. Eleanor felt like an outsider, a relic from a past Nathaniel was actively shedding. The night before the wedding, alone in her hotel room, Eleanor finally broke down. She called Brenda, her voice thick with tears. "I feel like I'm losing him, Brenda," she choked out, the raw pain tearing through her. He's right here, but he's not him. It's like Serafina is absorbing him. I don't recognize him anymore. Brenda, ever the calm voice of reason, tried to soothe her. Eleanor, it's normal. Sons grow up, they get married. Dynamics shift. You're just adjusting to the new reality. But Eleanor couldn't accept it. This wasn't a normal shift. This felt like a systematic, deliberate erosion. No, Eleanor insisted, her voice tight with conviction. It's not just a shift. It feels like she's systematically erasing me. Erasing my influence. Our history. Everything we built. Yet, Eleanor felt utterly powerless. How could she voice these suspicions without sounding like a jealous, possessive mother? The caricature was too easy to paint, too difficult to dispute. She couldn't risk alienating Nathaniel further, couldn't risk being completely cut off. So, she kept her fears locked away. A silent scream of a mother's intuition. Unheard and unheeded. The wedding itself was a blur of polished surfaces, muted colors, and carefully orchestrated elegance. Serafina was a stunning bride, Nathaniel a handsome groom, radiating a joy that, to Eleanor's discerning eye, seemed almost too perfect. The morning after the wedding, as Eleanor prepared to leave, Nathaniel pulled her into a tight hug. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice a soft whisper in her ear. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he murmured. "For everything you've done. I'm really happy." Eleanor hugged him back, fiercely, trying to imprint the feel of her son against her. "I wish you all the happiness in the world, my dear," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. But as he pulled away, the subtle, unmistakable scent of Serafina's expensive perfume clung to his shirt. A silent testament to their newfound unity, and it solidified Eleanor's lingering unease into a cold certainty. Watching them depart, driving away in a sleek, rented car, the Napa vineyard stretching out behind them, Eleanor felt a profound sense of loss. It wasn't just a goodbye to a joyous event. It felt like a goodbye to the son she had known, to the life they had shared. A chapter had closed, abruptly and irrevocably. Now, sitting in her car in the company parking lot, the weight of the cardboard box beside her felt heavier than ever. Her instincts, dismissed as overprotective neuroses for so long, were now confirmed with brutal clarity. Serafina hadn't just wanted Nathaniel. She had desired his entire life, his connections, his resources, and firing Eleanor, stripping her of her legacy at the company, was just the latest, most calculated maneuver in her complete and utter takeover. The drive home was a blur of traffic and a whirlwind of thoughts. Eleanor's mind raced, fueled by the cold certainty that Serafina's actions were not just vindictive, but premeditated. The calm facade she had maintained at the office began to crack under the weight of a dawning realization. If Serafina had lied about this, about my performance, about my value to the company, what else had she lied about? The question, once a whisper, now screamed through her thoughts, each possibility more chilling than the last. Her phone rang, startling her. She glanced at the screen. It was Nathaniel. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She answered, trying to keep her voice even. "Mom?" Nathaniel's voice was filled with a familiar mix of concern and confusion. "I just landed at the airport. I'm heading home now." "Is everything okay?" Serafina's been sending me strange texts all day, all cryptic, talking about unforeseen challenges at the office and difficult decisions. "What's going on?" Eleanor gripped the steering wheel tighter. So, Serafina had orchestrated her public humiliation, while Nathaniel was blissfully unaware, 3,000 miles away. The calculated cruelty of it sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins. Serafina hadn't even afforded Nathaniel the dignity of being present for his mother's dismissal. No, she preferred to paint a narrative for him, to control his perception of events. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to maintain composure. She couldn't alarm him. Not yet. He wouldn't understand, would likely side with his wife, who had undoubtedly already spun a tale. "I'm fine, dear," she managed, her voice carefully modulated. "Just had an interesting day at work, that's all. Nothing for you to worry about. You just focus on getting home safely." She needed time, Time to process, to understand the full scope of Serafina's machinations. But Nathaniel was her son, and he knew her too well. "Mom, you sound weird," he insisted, his concern escalating. "Your voice is off. What's going on? Is everything really okay?" He was probing, sensing the unspoken truth beneath her carefully constructed words. Eleanor knew she couldn't sustain the charade, not with him. Not when he was so close to Serafina. She had to protect him, and herself, from whatever poison Serafina was now undoubtedly spreading. Before he could ask anything more specific, she mumbled an excuse about a bad signal, and, with a swift, decisive motion, she hung up. She needed to think, to plan. Back in the quiet solitude of her home, Eleanor sat in the oppressive silence, the cardboard box of her belongings, an inert, heavy presence beside her, the day's events replayed in her mind, a dizzying montage of Serafina's cold smile, Daniel's loyal defiance, and her own unsettling calm. She sipped a mug of lukewarm tea, trying to steady her nerves, to find clarity amidst the chaos. Then, her phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. The message shattered the fragile quiet, sending shards of new dread through Eleanor. "Eleanor." Sophie's text read, "Serafina just held an emergency all-staff meeting. She announced your dismissal and, Eleanor, she accused you of embezzling funds from the company. She made everyone sign NDAs immediately. It's horrible. I'm so sorry." The mug slipped from Eleanor's trembling fingers, clattering to the hardwood floor. Tea splashed across the polished wood, a dark, spreading stain. Embezzling funds? Serafina was accusing her of stealing from the company she had helped build from the ground up. The company to which she had given her entire adult life, her integrity, her very soul. The audacity, the sheer villainy of the accusation, left her breathless, a cold fury rising within her. This wasn't just dismissal. This was character assassination. This was Serafina's scorched earth policy in full effect. A cold resolve settled over Eleanor. She walked to her home office, her mind already shifting gears, analytical and precise. She sat down at her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard, logging into the company's internal financial systems. To her surprise, her administrative access was still active. A careless oversight on Serafina's part, or perhaps a deliberate delay in revoking her credentials. Either way, it was an opportunity. She navigated through the labyrinthine layers of accounts, searching for anything out of the ordinary, anything that could possibly support Serafina's outrageous claim. And then she found it. A series of suspicious transfers. They stretched back over 6 months, small at first, then gradually increasing in sum, flowing into an unfamiliar subsidiary account that Eleanor didn't recognize, an account not listed in any of their standard internal ledgers. Her heart pounded in her chest. She scrolled down, her eyes widening as she noted the dates and amounts. The pattern was clear, systematic. And then she saw it. A transfer of a staggering $50,000, dated just that very morning, the day of her dismissal. The audacity, the sheer brazenness. Eleanor clicked on the details of the most recent transfer, pulling up the authorization signatures. A chill, colder than any she had felt that day, snaked down her spine. The primary authorization read, Serafina Thorne Hawthorne. And the secondary authorization, the one that made her blood run cold, stated, N. Hawthorne. Nathaniel. Eleanor worked methodically, her hands steady despite the tremor in her soul. She printed the records, page after page, each one a damning piece of evidence. 23 unauthorized transfers in total, adding up to just over $200,000, all funneling into this mysterious subsidiary account, and every single one of them bore Nathaniel's apparent approval. His digital signature. She stared at the printouts, her mind reeling, trying to make sense of the horrifying implications. There were only 2 possibilities, each one a dagger to her heart. Either Nathaniel was complicit, a willing participant in Serafina's scheme to siphon money from the company, a thought too painful to fully grasp, or Serafina, with her polished ambition and ruthless cunning, was expertly forging his signature, implicating him in a crime he knew nothing about. Both scenarios were a nightmare, but one promised a deeper, more devastating betrayal than the other. Eleanor felt a terrible certainty that she was about to uncover a truth far darker than she could have imagined. If you're still with me, you're about to hear the real turning point in this story. The corporate drama, the family betrayal. It all comes to a head right now. Like this video. Share it with someone who loves a good drama. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss how this story unfolds. A violent slam of a car door echoed through the quiet evening, followed by rapid footsteps on her porch. Eleanor barely had time to brace herself before her front door burst open. Nathaniel stood there, a whirlwind of confusion and raw anger. His tie was loosened, hanging askew, his usually immaculate hair disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it 100 times. His eyes, normally warm and composed, were wide and agitated, darting around the room, searching for answers. "Mom, what the hell happened today?" he demanded, his voice strained, barely containing a shout. "Serafina sent me a few vague texts, then called and said you'd resigned, and it was all amicable. But then my phone started blowing up. Half the staff is calling me, saying you were fired, Mom." "Fired? And then something about accusations of theft? What is going on?" He was practically vibrating with a mixture of disbelief and mounting dread. Eleanor, still clutching the printed financial records, gestured calmly towards the armchair. "Sit down, Nathaniel," she said, her voice steady, attempting to project an assurance she didn't quite feel. "We need to talk. All of it." But he wouldn't sit. He remained standing, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on her, insisting on knowing the unvarnished truth, needing to reconcile the contradictory stories tearing at him. She began, recounting the events of the day in a clear, concise manner. The unexpected conference room meeting, Serafina's cold, calculated dismissal, her cutting words about outdated people, then, the brutal blow. Sophie's text, detailing Serafina's emergency meeting and the shocking accusation of embezzling funds. Eleanor watched her son's face as she spoke, observing the rapid succession of emotions. Nathaniel's expression shifted, morphing from disbelief to a flash of anger at the thought of her dismissal, then a flicker of something almost like relief when she mentioned the embezzlement claim. He shook his head vehemently. "That's impossible, Mom," he stated, his voice firm, clinging to a desperate hope. "Serafina wouldn't do that. She wouldn't accuse you of something like that. There must be a mistake." Eleanor didn't argue. She simply slid the stack of printed financial records across the coffee table towards him. The pages were stark white against the dark wood, the numbers and names starkly printed. "Then explain these," she said, her voice soft, but with an underlying steel that brooked no denial. Nathaniel picked up the papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. His eyes scanned the first few pages, the transaction dates, the amounts. His initial skepticism began to waver, replaced by a growing unease. He flipped through, past the general ledger entries, until he reached the authorization pages, the ones bearing the signatures. As he read Serafina Thorne Hawthorne and then N. Hawthorne, secondary authorization, his face turned completely white. The color drained from him so entirely that Eleanor worried he might collapse. He stood there for a long moment, the papers trembling slightly in his hands. His gaze was fixed on the second signature, his own name, printed in a font that mimicked his official company signature. Then, his voice barely a whisper, hollow and shell-shocked, he spoke. "This isn't my signature," he said, the words barely audible. "I never authorized any of these transfers. Not a single one." Eleanor met his gaze, a profound sadness in her eyes. "I didn't think you had, dear," she confirmed, her voice gentle but firm. It wasn't an accusation towards him, but a quiet affirmation of her faith in his integrity. She then carefully, patiently, began to lead him through the implications, helping him connect the dots of Serafina's intricate web of deceit. "Nathaniel," she began, taking a step closer. "This account, it's not a recognized subsidiary. These transfers, they started 6 months ago, just after Serafina took a more active role in the company's financial oversight, and the amounts, they've been steadily increasing." The unspoken conclusion hung heavy in the air, a monstrous truth that was almost too painful to articulate. His wife had been stealing from the company and forging his name to cover her tracks, implicating him in a crime he was oblivious to. Nathaniel stumbled backwards, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. He still struggled, grasping for any explanation, any loophole, any way to avoid the crushing reality. Maybe she was trying to protect the company somehow? He pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. Or reorganizing funds for a secret project? She's very strategic, Mom. You know that. Eleanor walked over, gently taking his trembling hand in hers. His skin was cold. Nathaniel, she said, her voice unwavering. Think, she fired me while you were away, 3,000 miles away, knowing you couldn't intervene. She then immediately accused me of the very crime she's been committing for months. Attempting to shift the blame. To cover her tracks. This isn't protection. This is a meticulously planned cover-up, designed to take me out and pin her crimes on me. The full weight of the betrayal began to sink in. Nathaniel pulled his hand away, beginning to pace the length of the small living room, his movements jerky, agitated, his mind raced. Replaying every interaction, every conversation, every subtle manipulation, the new life Serafina had promised, the tasteful changes, the expensive hobbies, the increasingly isolated relationship with his mother. It all twisted into something sinister. If this is true, he muttered, his voice hoarse, filled with a deep, chilling agony. If this is true, she's been lying to me. Every single day, for months, every smile, every kiss, every loving word, all of it a lie. Eleanor watched him, her heart aching for her son. For a moment, she hesitated, wondering if she should deliver the final, devastating blow. But the truth had to come out, no matter how painful. I think, Nathaniel, she said, her voice quiet, firm. I think she's been lying to you since the day you met her. The words hung in the air, a declaration of a long-held suspicion, now chillingly confirmed. The foundation of his life, built on Serafina's artifice, had just crumbled. The last of Eleanor's words hung in the air, a final, devastating blow. Nathaniel crumpled into the armchair, burying his face in his hands. The elegant, successful man Eleanor knew vanished, replaced by a broken shell. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. I need proof, he choked out, his voice muffled, ragged. Absolute proof. I can't believe this. Without it, Eleanor understood. To dismantle the carefully constructed world he had built with Serafina, to confront the woman he had loved and trusted implicitly, required undeniable, concrete evidence. His entire perception of reality was shattering, and he needed something solid to grasp onto amidst the wreckage. As Nathaniel sat there, lost in thought, the fight slowly returning to his eyes, Eleanor observed him, her heart aching. She recognized the slow, painful process of awakening, the blind devotion, the unquestioning adoration he had held for Serafina, was finally cracking. It was a terrible thing to witness, to watch her son's innocence shatter before her eyes. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if ignorance might have been kinder, if it would have been less painful for him to continue believing the lie. But then, she quickly dismissed the thought. It was too late for that now. The truth, however harsh, had to be faced. Finally, Nathaniel lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed but determined. I'm going home, he declared, his voice firming with resolve. I need to look at our personal accounts, cross-reference everything, and I need to figure out how to handle this. I can't just let this go. The shock had begun to recede, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. Eleanor walked him to the door, her hand resting gently on his arm. Nathaniel, whatever you find, she said, her voice soft but unwavering. I'm here. I've always been here. Remember that. Her words were a balm, a promise of unconditional love and support in the face of unimaginable betrayal. He turned, pulling her into a tight, almost desperate hug. For a moment, she felt like she was holding her little boy again, clinging to her for comfort and safety. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered into her hair, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. That I didn't listen to you." Eleanor simply held him, stroking his hair, offering silent solace. The apology wasn't necessary, but it confirmed a reconciliation she had long yearned for, a reconnection forged in the fires of shared pain. The next morning, the sun had barely begun to paint the sky when Eleanor's phone rang. It was 6 a.m. Nathaniel. His voice, when he spoke, was hollow, stripped bare of any emotion save profound exhaustion and despair. "Mom," he said, the words barely coherent. "I need you to come over now. Please. Bring your key to the office. I need to get into Serafina's desk." Eleanor didn't ask questions. She knew. Something significant had been unearthed. She dressed quickly, her hands trembling slightly, and rushed to his house. It was dark, the curtains drawn, the silence inside thick and heavy. She found him in his study, the room littered with open ledgers, bank statements, and printouts. His eyes were red-rimmed, bloodshot, and his face was pale, etched with sleeplessness and anguish. He looked like he hadn't slept a wink. Nathaniel looked up as she entered, holding up a manila folder, its contents clearly disturbing. His voice, when he spoke, was flat, devoid of its usual warmth. "Her real name isn't Serafina Thorne," he began, the words a hammer blow. "It's Amanda Vulov. And she was never between jobs when we met. She was fired from her previous company for embezzlement." Eleanor's breath hitched. The pieces were falling into place, forming an even uglier picture than she had imagined. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. I had my doubts about her, Mom," Nathaniel confessed, his gaze dropping to the floor, heavy with self-reproach. "Little things. Secretive calls. Stories that didn't quite add up. I started feeling uneasy. So, about 6 months ago, I hired a private investigator. Just to be sure. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that you were rubbing off on me." He managed a bitter, humorless laugh. "Turns out your paranoid suspicions were the only honest thing in my marriage." He then laid out the damning details, each one a fresh stab to Eleanor's heart. Serafina, or Amanda, had a history. 2 previous marriages, both to wealthy, established men, both ending in messy divorces that resulted in substantial settlements for her. She was a professional con artist, a black widow in designer clothing, systematically building her wealth through calculated deception. But the most devastating revelation, the one that truly shattered Nathaniel, came last. "And then," he said, his voice cracking, his eyes brimming with unshed tears, "the pregnancy, the miscarriage. It was all a lie, Mom. All of it. The PI found her medical records from right before we got engaged. She was on birth control. She faked it. All of it. To rush me. To manipulate me into proposing. Into marrying her quickly. Before I could discover any of this, he slammed the folder shut. The sound echoing ominously in the silent room. The depth of the betrayal was unfathomable. Eleanor could only watch, speechless, as her son's world completely imploded around him. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. The fake pregnancy, the feigned miscarriage. It was a level of cold, calculating manipulation she hadn't thought possible. Her heart ached for Nathaniel, for the brutal way his hopes and dreams had been twisted into tools of deceit. She reached for his hand, squeezing it, a silent reassurance that she was there. As she looked around the study, trying to make sense of the scattered evidence, her gaze fell upon a stack of glossy surveillance photos. She picked them up, her eyes scanning the images. In one, Serafina was laughing, her head thrown back, with an unknown man. He was tall, dark-haired, with a confident, almost arrogant smirk. "Victor Stone," the caption read. There was a genuine warmth in Serafina's smile in that picture. A carefree happiness that Eleanor had rarely, if ever, seen directed at her son. "Who is this?" Eleanor asked, holding up the photo, her voice tight. Nathaniel swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the image. "That's Victor Stone," he said, his voice flat. "Her real boyfriend." The PI confirmed it. They've been living together for months in a downtown condo she bought, with company funds, the money she's been stealing. He gestured vaguely at the financial printouts, everything she told me about working late, about business trips. She was with him, building a life with him, with my money. Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition. The unbridled joy on Serafina's face in the photos stood in stark contrast to the perfectly composed, slightly detached demeanor she always displayed around Nathaniel. It was the face of a woman truly in love, or perhaps truly in control, thriving in her deception. Nathaniel continued, his voice strained. The PI's final report arrived yesterday, just before I flew back from Seattle. That's why I came home so frantically. I saw it on my work email while I was still at the airport. I was going to confront her, to give her a chance to explain. He ran a hand over his face, looking utterly defeated. But then I got your call, and after I saw what she did to you, the accusations, the forged signatures, it wasn't just about me anymore. It accelerated my understanding of her endgame. He then slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a pre-filled divorce petition, impeccably drafted, legally dense. Eleanor read through it, her eyes widening in horror. The document contained a litany of false accusations against Nathaniel, claims of emotional abuse, of forcing her to take a senior position at the company against her will, of isolating her from her friends and family. It painted him as a controlling, manipulative husband, a monster. She's been building a case, Nathaniel explained, his voice devoid of emotion. Setting me up. The money she's been siphoning off. The way she hid it in those subsidiary accounts. It was done so cleverly. It all looks like legitimate business expenses, transfers between departments, investments in shell companies. It would take a forensic accountant weeks to untangle. And even then, without insider knowledge, it's hard to definitively prove fraud. He tapped a finger on the signature sections of the financial documents. Her forged signatures are so skilled, so precise. A layperson wouldn't even question them. It would take a handwriting expert, possibly even court-ordered analysis, to prove they weren't mine. Eleanor stared at the divorce petition, then back at the surveillance photos of Serafina and Victor. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, forming a terrifyingly clear image. This wasn't a spontaneous act of opportunism. This was a meticulously crafted plan. Years in the making. Serafina had been playing the long game, carefully constructing a narrative of victimhood for herself, while simultaneously siphoning funds and preparing to strip Nathaniel bare. Eleanor realized, with a chilling certainty, that this was a pattern, a playbook Serafina had likely used with her previous wealthy husbands. She was a predator, and Nathaniel had been her latest prey. She's been documenting everything, Mom, Nathaniel continued, his voice hoarse. Every argument, every slight, every time I raised my voice, even in frustration. She's twisted every interaction, every disagreement, into evidence of my supposed abusive behavior. She's got a folder, just like this one, filled with her own evidence. She was planning to destroy me, to take everything. A new thought, an even more sinister layer of deception, struck Eleanor. Nathaniel, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The company accounts. When I logged in yesterday, my administrative access was still active. That's how I found all this. Nathaniel nodded, a grim expression on his face. She knew, Mom. She had IT monitoring your computer access. She was tracking your file reviews. She knew you were digging. She saw that you were getting close, that you were looking into things she didn't want you to see. He paused, his eyes meeting hers, a bitter understanding passing between them. She fired you because she was afraid you were getting too close to discovering what she's been doing. She needed you out, before you uncovered the truth. The irony was not lost on Eleanor. Her lifetime of dedication, her meticulous attention to detail, her very efforts to safeguard the company, had inadvertently made her Serafina's biggest threat, and in striking her down, Serafina had inadvertently exposed her entire scheme. A quiet, terrifying resolve began to harden within Eleanor. This woman had not only betrayed her son and stolen from her company, She had actively sought to destroy Eleanor's reputation and legacy. This could not, would not, stand. Eleanor looked at her son, his face a mask of profound agony. The gravity of what he had uncovered was immense, enough to break anyone. "How are you coping with all of this, Nathaniel?" she asked softly, gently, knowing there were no easy answers. His composure, which had held surprisingly well through the initial shock, finally cracked. His eyes filled with tears, and his voice trembled as he spoke. "I don't know, Mom," he confessed, the words raw with pain. "I honestly don't know. I thought I knew this person. I loved her. We built a life together. Or at least, I thought we did. How do you process finding out that everything you believed about your life, about your future, was a lie?" Eleanor wrapped her arm around him, pulling him close. "One day at a time, darling," she whispered, stroking his hair. "One truth at a time. It's overwhelming now, I know. But you'll get through this. And remember, not everything was a lie. Your family is real. Your love for me, for this company, that's real. The company we built together, that's real. Hold on to that." Nathaniel pulled away, wiping his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I let her come between us. I didn't listen to you, all those times you tried to warn me, all those subtle hints. And I just dismissed them. I should have trusted you." Eleanor offered a small, knowing smile, a hint of her old playful self returning. "Well, you do need to apologize for questioning my impeccable judgment," she teased gently, trying to lighten the crushing weight of the moment. Nathaniel managed a watery chuckle, a faint echo of his old self. A new resolve began to settle between them. The painful truth, however devastating, was far better than living another moment within Serafina's elaborate lie. They knew what they had to do. They had to face her, armed with the undeniable evidence of her treachery. At precisely 7:30 a.m., Eleanor and Nathaniel arrived at the office. The building was still quiet. Only a few early risers scattered through the cubicles. Nathaniel, though visibly shaken, his face still pale from a sleepless night, walked with a newfound sense of purpose. "I have to," he stated, his voice firm, his gaze fixed on Serafina's office door. "If I'm going to rebuild this company, rebuild my life, I need to know everything. And I need to confront her, face to face, using Eleanor's old master key, a relic of her decades of seniority that Serafina hadn't yet thought to revoke." They quietly entered Serafina's office. It was as meticulously organized as Serafina herself. A minimalist desk, perfectly aligned files. Not a single item out of place. It was the office of someone with nothing to hide. Or everything. While Nathaniel immediately sat down at Serafina's computer, attempting to access her encrypted files with the methods the PI had provided, Eleanor began a methodical search of the physical space. She checked drawers, scanned shelves, her experienced eyes looking for any deviation from the pristine order. Behind a thick binder filled with HR policies, she discovered a small, cleverly disguised hidden folder. Inside, nestled amongst seemingly innocuous documents, were printouts of emails. The label on the folder simply read, "Personal Insurance." Her heart hammered as she read the contents. They were exchanges between Serafina, identified by her real name, Amanda, and Victor Stone. The emails were chillingly casual, discussing their plans, their finances, even how they would frame Nathaniel. One email, dated just a few weeks prior, sent a cold shiver down Eleanor's spine. "M is getting suspicious," it read, clearly referring to Nathaniel. "We need to accelerate the timeline. Make sure all evidence points to him, not us." "Nathaniel," Eleanor whispered, her voice tight with suppressed fury. "Look at these." He paused his work on the computer, his eyes scanning the emails, his face darkened further. "She used my login credentials. Mom," he explained, his voice flat. "The PI figured it out. She installed a keylogger on my work computer months ago. Every time I typed my password, she got it. That's how she made it look like I authorized all those transactions. Every single fraudulent transfer, every manipulation of company funds, was executed under my digital signature. She created an undeniable paper trail, where everything appeared to be authorized by me. They continued to uncover more, each revelation a fresh blow. There were more documents detailing Serafina's extensive, fabricated documentation of Nathaniel's supposed abusive behavior. Daily logs, meticulously crafted, twisting every kindness, every frustration, every normal marital disagreement into evidence of cruelty. Serafina had systematically built a false reality, ready to deploy it in court. Nathaniel stared at the screen, his face aghast. "How did I not see this, Mom?" he asked, his voice raw with disbelief and self-loathing. "How could I have been so blind?" Eleanor placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Because you're not a sociopath, Nathaniel," she responded simply, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. "You see the best in people. You operate from a place of trust and love. She exploited that. She used your good nature against you." Suddenly, the distinct click-clack of high heels echoed from the hallway, approaching their office. Eleanor and Nathaniel exchanged a grim look. 8:15 a.m. Serafina was early. Nathaniel straightened his shoulders, a hard glint entering his eyes. "I'll do it," he said, his voice resolute. "I'll confront her." He pulled himself up, the shock and pain still evident, but now overlaid with an unshakable determination. The door swung open, and Serafina entered, perfectly coiffed, a triumphant smile already gracing her lips. She stopped dead, her eyes widening slightly as she saw them both. Her smile faltered, replaced by a momentary flash of confusion, then quickly masked by feigned concern. "Eleanor?" she began, her voice carefully modulated. "What are you doing here? Your access was revoked." "Nathaniel, darling, what's happening?" Nathaniel stepped forward, his gaze piercing. "We need to talk, Serafina," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And Eleanor is very much involved." The game, for Serafina, was officially over. Serafina, though visibly startled to find Eleanor and Nathaniel in her office, quickly regained her composure. Her carefully constructed facade was back in place, a perfect, unreadable mask. She glided gracefully to her chair, her back ramrod straight. "I'm afraid I don't understand," she said, her voice cool and measured, her eyes meeting Nathaniel's with an air of innocent confusion. "What is all this drama about? My day has just begun." Nathaniel, however, was past pretense. His calm was unnerving, a stark contrast to Serafina's practiced poise. He quietly spread the printed emails between her and Victor Stone across her pristine desk, each one a dagger to her carefully crafted image. "Let's start with these," he said, his voice low, devoid of any warmth. Serafina's mask briefly slipped. A flicker of raw panic darted across her eyes, quickly replaced by indignation. "I don't know what you're talking about," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "These are fabricated documents, a pathetic attempt to discredit me." Eleanor stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "Fabricated? Are the surveillance photos of you and Mr. Stone kissing also fabricated, Serafina?" As she spoke, Nathaniel placed a series of clear, damning photographs next to the emails. Serafina, in vivid detail, wrapped in Victor's arms, sharing intimate moments, undeniable proof of their affair. The fight finally left Serafina's eyes, her bravado faltering. She leaned back in her chair, a forced sigh escaping her lips. "Fine," she conceded, her voice tight. "I admit to seeing someone else, but that hardly makes me a criminal." "No," Nathaniel countered, his voice like ice. "But embezzling over $200,000 from our company does." He then revealed the stack of forged transfer records, each bearing his supposedly authorized digital signature, laying them out for her to see. The sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming. Serafina's composure finally cracked. The polished veneer shattered, revealing a flash of raw, desperate anger. "You authorized those," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Nathaniel. "You knew. Or perhaps I was protecting our investments, moving funds into accounts I controlled with Victor. It was all for us." Her voice was shrill, losing its carefully cultivated elegance. In that moment, Nathaniel saw her for what she truly was. A ruthless, self-serving opportunist, completely devoid of empathy. The last of his illusions about her crumbled into dust. He looked at her with a chilling detachment, his voice firm, unwavering. "Serafina," he stated, "this is over. You have two choices. You can return every penny you stole, sign a full confession detailing your fraud and forgery, and leave quietly. Or, we go to the authorities right now, and you face the full legal consequences." Serafina's eyes blazed with fury. She slammed her hand on the desk, refusing to be cornered. "I will not," she hissed, her face contorted with rage. "You can't prove anything. I'll deny everything. And if you dare go to the police, I'll release my own evidence against you, Nathaniel. My divorce petition accusing you of abuse, of forced employment. I'll make sure you lose everything." She then unleashed a hateful tirade, her voice dripping with venom. "You're weak, Nathaniel. Always have been. And you," she spat, turning her glare on Eleanor. "You're nothing but a pathetic, jealous old woman who couldn't stand to see her son happy." With a final, cruel remark about Victor and her own promiscuity, she stormed out of the office, the click of her heels echoing through the silent hallway, her exit as dramatic and self-serving as her entrance into their lives. Nathaniel stood frozen, the force of her hatred leaving him stunned. "I think I'm going to be sick, Mom," he whispered, his face ashen. Eleanor put her arm around him, her gaze fixed on the hallway. They heard the screech of tires as Serafina's car sped away from the parking lot. "It's over, darling," Eleanor murmured, pulling him close. "She can't hurt us anymore." But even as she spoke the words, she knew the damage ran deep, a wound that would take time to heal. 6 months later, the sun streamed into Eleanor's office, painting it with a warm, welcoming glow. Her office, it had been meticulously restored to its former state, with some subtle, modern upgrades. The company was thriving, having weathered the scandal with surprising resilience, thanks to Nathaniel's transparent leadership and Eleanor's steady hand. The FBI investigation had exposed Serafina, or rather, Amanda Vulov, as a serial con artist. She had been apprehended attempting to flee the country and was now facing charges for stealing over $2 million from various victims across 6 states. The legal experts were predicting a sentence of 20 to 30 years in federal prison. Justice, slow and arduous, was being served. Nathaniel walked in, looking remarkably healthier, the shadows gone from his eyes. He carried 2 steaming mugs of coffee, handing one to Eleanor. "Morning, Mom," he said, a genuine smile gracing his lips. "Good news. We just closed the deal on the Beaumont contract. A huge win." Eleanor smiled back, a deep sense of pride swelling within her. "That's wonderful news, Nathaniel. I knew you could do it." He settled into the chair opposite her. "Oh, and the trial date for Amanda," he said, the name still leaving a faint sour taste in his mouth. "It's been set. They think they have enough evidence to convict her without our testimony, but they're still asking us to be on standby." They talked for a while longer, about the company, about the slow, but steady, process of his healing. "It's still hard, Mom," he admitted, "but it gets a little easier every day. I'm seeing someone new, actually. Her name is Sarah. She's a teacher, kind, and she makes me laugh. She knows everything, about Serafina, about the whole mess. And she understands." He hesitated, then looked at Eleanor with a hopeful glint in his eyes. Would you like to meet her sometime?" Eleanor's heart swelled. This was more than just an introduction. It was a symbol of renewed trust, of healing, of a future unburdened by deceit. She reached across the desk, taking his hand. "I would love to meet her, Nathaniel," she said, a tear welling in her eye. "On one condition." Nathaniel looked at her, ready for anything. "Promise me," Eleanor continued, her voice firm, "that you will never, ever, let anyone come between us again." "Not like that." Nathaniel squeezed her hand, his gaze earnest. "Never again. Mom," he vowed. "Never again." The promise, "never again," resonated with a profound weight between Eleanor and Nathaniel. It wasn't just a pledge to avoid future manipulators. It was a reaffirmation of their unbreakable bond, a silent vow that no external force would ever again drive a wedge between them. The healing process, for Nathaniel especially, was slow but steady, a testament to his resilience and Eleanor's unwavering support. A few weeks after their intense confrontation with Serafina, Nathaniel invited Eleanor to meet Sarah. The invitation, coming from Nathaniel, felt like another significant step, a gesture of profound trust. They chose a quaint, sunlit cafe, nestled in a quiet part of town, far from the corporate hustle. Eleanor arrived a little early, her heart a mix of anticipation and a familiar, maternal protectiveness. She scanned the faces, a tiny, almost imperceptible filter of caution over her judgment. Then Nathaniel walked in hand with a woman who radiated warmth and genuine kindness. Sarah was nothing like Serafina. Her beauty was natural, her smile authentic, crinkling the corners of her eyes. She wore a simple, elegant dress, and her movements were graceful but unpretentious. She was a kindergarten teacher, Nathaniel had told her, and there was a gentle patience in her demeanor that was immediately apparent. "Mom, this is Sarah," Nathaniel said, his eyes sparkling with an honest joy Eleanor hadn't seen in years. "Sarah, this is my amazing mother, Eleanor." Sarah extended her hand, her grip firm and warm, not the calculating assessment Eleanor remembered from Serafina. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Eleanor," Sarah said, her voice soft and melodious. "Nathaniel talks about you all the time." There was no hidden agenda, no subtle condescension, just genuine warmth. Eleanor found herself relaxing almost instantly. Sarah knew everything. Nathaniel had laid bare his entire painful ordeal, the betrayal, the shame, and Sarah, instead of recoiling, had offered understanding and empathy. Throughout their conversation, Sarah listened more than she spoke, asking thoughtful questions about Eleanor's life and work, showing a sincere interest that was refreshing. She made Nathaniel laugh, a deep, unrestrained laugh that seemed to chase away the last lingering shadows of his past heartache. Watching them together, Eleanor felt a wave of profound relief wash over her. Her son was not only healing, he was finding genuine happiness again. This wasn't a new life manufactured by deceit, but an authentic future built on trust and mutual respect. Back at the company, life had resumed, albeit with a renewed sense of purpose and a stronger, more ethical foundation. Eleanor had not just returned to her office, she had been invited back with full honors and a position tailor-made for her vast experience and unwavering integrity. Nathaniel, having restructured the executive team, insisted she take on the role of Chief Operations Officer, a position that solidified her strategic influence and recognized her immense contribution to the company's survival and subsequent resurgence. The atmosphere in the office was palpable. Morale, shattered by Serafina's reign of terror and the subsequent accusations, had been meticulously rebuilt. Daniel from the design team, Sophie from accounting, and countless others who had quietly supported Eleanor, now worked with renewed vigor and loyalty. The fear of an outdated purge was gone, replaced by an appreciation for wisdom and experience. Eleanor, now more than ever, was the heart and soul of the company. She spent her days mentoring young talent, streamlining processes, and steering the company towards innovative new ventures, her decades of institutional knowledge proving invaluable. The company wasn't just thriving, it was flourishing, having grown stronger and more resilient from the challenges it had faced. Months passed. Serafina's trial concluded swiftly, the mountain of evidence against her insurmountable. The jury, presented with the forged documents, the surveillance photos, the financial irregularities, and the testimony from previous victims, took less than a day to deliver a guilty verdict. Amanda Vulov, the woman who had once been Serafina Thorne Hawthorne, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, a sentence that offered a measure of justice for all those she had defrauded and emotionally decimated. Nathaniel and Eleanor did not have to testify. Their carefully prepared evidence and the PI's thorough report were more than enough. One quiet afternoon, Eleanor sat in her restored office, a cup of herbal tea steaming beside her. She looked out the window at the bustling city below, a profound sense of peace settling over her. The bitterness she had felt toward Serafina had long since faded, replaced by a deep understanding of the darkness that could reside within human nature. and a stronger appreciation for the light. She had reclaimed her legacy, her reputation, and most importantly, her relationship with her son. Nathaniel, now more discerning, more mature, and utterly grounded, walked into her office, a familiar smile on his face. He no longer carried the burden of guilt or the weight of deception. He was a leader, both at work and in his personal life, making decisions with careful consideration and an unwavering moral compass. He valued Eleanor's counsel above all others, a trust that was now absolute. "Mom," he began, "just finished reviewing the Q3 reports. We're exceeding projections by 15%. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Eleanor felt a surge of pride. "That's fantastic, Nathaniel," she replied. He leaned against her desk, a contemplative look on his face. "It's funny, you know," he mused. "Through all of it, the only thing that really mattered was what was real, what was true. And that was you. Our family. This company, built on honest work." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "You taught me that, Mom." Even when I was too blind to see it, Eleanor reached out, taking his hand across the desk. Her heart swelled with love and quiet triumph. The ordeal had been devastating, but it had ultimately forged something stronger, something more profound. It had stripped away the superficial, the deceptive, leaving behind the enduring power of family, loyalty, and unwavering truth. The memory of Serafina, once a haunting specter, was now merely a distant, dark lesson, a testament to the fact that even the most elaborate lies eventually crumble, and the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way to the surface. She had faced her ultimate betrayer, survived, and emerged not just intact, but triumphant. The sun, bright and unwavering, streamed through the expansive windows of Eleanor's office, illuminating the quiet hum of productivity that permeated the entire building. 6 months had stretched into a year, then another. Since Serafina's reign of deceit had crumbled, the legal battles had faded into memory, replaced by a renewed focus on growth, integrity, and innovation. Eleanor, firmly entrenched as Chief Operations Officer, found a deep satisfaction in her work, a sense of purpose that had been vigorously rekindled. She wasn't just a figurehead, she was an active, strategic force, her decades of experience now seen as an invaluable asset, not an outdated relic. The company, once teetering on the brink of financial and reputational ruin, had not only recovered, but flourished. Nathaniel, hardened and refined by the crucible of betrayal, had emerged as a formidable CEO. He led with a newfound prudence, a discerning eye, and an unwavering commitment to transparency and ethical business practices. The dark cloud of Serafina's fraud had forced them to implement stricter internal controls, to foster a culture of open communication, and to instill an even deeper sense of loyalty among their employees. Daniel, the brave young designer, had been promoted to head of his department, and Sophie, the observant accountant, was now a trusted financial analyst, both flourishing under leadership that genuinely valued their contributions. Eleanor often observed Nathaniel during meetings. He carried himself differently now. The naive adoration that had once clouded his judgment was gone, replaced by a keen perceptiveness. He listened intently, spoke with authority, and made decisions not just for profit, but for the long-term health and integrity of the company and its people. His interactions with staff were grounded in genuine respect, a stark contrast to Serafina's calculated charm. It filled Eleanor's heart with a quiet pride to see him not just survive, but truly thrive. He had learned the hardest lessons, but he had learned them well. His personal life, too, had blossomed. Sarah, the kind kindergarten teacher, had become an indispensable part of his world. Their relationship was a quiet strength, built on honesty, shared laughter, and a mutual appreciation for life's simpler joys. Eleanor had grown fond of Sarah, admiring her gentle spirit and her unwavering support for Nathaniel. There was a groundedness to Sarah that Eleanor instinctively trusted, a genuine warmth that was healing for her son. They had even started talking about a future together, a real future this time, built on solid ground. Nathaniel, who once yearned for a whole new life engineered by Serafina, was now building one that was authentically his own, filled with genuine connection and peaceful contentment. One afternoon, Nathaniel walked into Eleanor's office, not with business documents, but with a framed photograph. It was a picture of him, Eleanor, and Sarah, taken during a weekend hike. All three were laughing, genuinely, unreservedly happy. He placed it on Eleanor's desk, right beside the small clay pot he had made for her as a child. "Just wanted to give you this," he said, his voice soft. A reminder of what truly matters. Eleanor looked at the photo, her eyes misting. "It's beautiful, Nathaniel," she murmured. "Everything feels right now." He nodded, leaning against the doorframe, a relaxed posture that bespoke his inner peace. "It does," he agreed. "The past. It was a brutal teacher. But I wouldn't trade what I've learned, or where it's brought us, for anything." He met her gaze, his eyes shining with profound sincerity. "You were right all along, Mom. About everything. About Serafina. About trusting my gut. About the importance of family." Eleanor smiled, a deep, contented smile that reached her eyes. "A mother's intuition," she said with a gentle laugh. "It rarely lets you down." The conversation drifted to company matters, then to their plans for the upcoming holiday season. The ease and openness between them were a testament to the bond that had been reforged through adversity. The initial pain of betrayal had been searing, a deep wound in their family, but it had ultimately served as a painful catalyst for a deeper, more authentic connection. They had faced the darkness of deception and emerged into the light of truth, together. As the years unfolded, Eleanor continued to guide the company with wisdom and integrity, eventually transitioning to a revered advisory role, a living legend within the industry. Nathaniel, at her side, grew into a visionary leader, respected for his ethical stance and his compassionate leadership. The company's success became a testament not just to their business acumen, but to the triumph of honesty over deceit, of loyalty over betrayal. Eleanor would sometimes reflect on the journey, on the brutal lessons learned. Serafina, or Amanda, remained a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the corrosive power of greed and manipulation. But her memory no longer held power over Eleanor or Nathaniel. Their lives were vibrant, full of purpose, and surrounded by genuine connections. The legacy Eleanor ultimately built was far greater than any corporate title or financial success. It was a legacy of resilience, of unwavering love, and of the enduring power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. She had not only protected her company and her son, she had affirmed her own worth, solidified her place, and taught them all that true strength lies not in power or pretense, but in authenticity and the unbreakable bonds of family.